Because, for those who might feel overwhelmed by, feeling like the light at the end of the tunnel is so far out of reach, remember that we may not be able to change our destination in an instant, but we can choose to change the direction right now.
Wow. Hi. Amy. Hi. So good to have you.
So
Finally.
Nice to chat. How's my audio? Is it all right?
Your audio is great.
Okay, cool.
Your audio is great. Okay, so we're here. Everybody's on. And all right, let me just give a quick introduction for everybody. This is Amy Chan, the author of Breakup Bootcamp. Until Instagram tries to figure out the reversal, we're just going to keep doing this. Breakup Bootcamp. How to rewire your heart. The heart hacker, the heart whisperer. She's been blogging for Huffington Post, Sunday Sun, Vancouver Sun, and you've been featured on every single thing I could ever. Like fashion magazine, Marie Claire. This week you were with
Dr. T.
You were on The Doctors, right?
Yeah.
You were on The Doctors. You were helping someone with a breakup right then and there.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Tell me about that experience.
Yeah, so there was a woman who was in a relationship for 6 years, and right at the beginning of the pandemic, she's making dinner, and then she gets a text message from her boyfriend saying, "I can't do this anymore." And she's like, "What?" And then as she goes to reply, she realizes that her number had already been blocked. And she has not spoken to him since. This has been almost about a year now. And so, she's not only grieving another layer of devastation, not only that the relationship is over, but her, best friend, her trusted partner, 6 years, who they were talking about getting engaged, just vanished. In such a heartless, cold way. So the doctors had her on the episode, and she was asking for advice on how to open her heart again, how to be confident to date after what has happened. So I was giving her some advice, and then we, at the end, gifted her a spot to the next virtual breakup boot camp.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Which actually that brings me to the question, because to get people up to speed, what exactly is Renew Breakup Bootcamp? Overview.
Yeah. So Breakup Bootcamp, we hold physical retreats and now virtual ones. And they're 4-day, pretty intensive programs to help people heal from the past and move forward. And we bring in 13 experts, from psychologists, behavioral scientists, sex educators. We even bring in a dominatrix who has a PhD from Berkeley, who teaches on the psychology of power dynamics. And we have programming from 8:30 morning until night, back to back. And it's pretty intensive because most of these people have been going through therapy for many years and they've hit a wall. And we take a holistic approach. So not only are you going to learn about subconscious patterns and how to rewire them, but right after that, you'll have a breathwork session to help move, stored trauma and emotions through your body. We bring in an on-site chef. All the meals are cooked, so you're eating healthy food. And then you're in an intimate group of people who are also going through the same thing. Different ages. I've had from 23 to 72 years old. And it's a beautiful community. And we really focus on the patterns, the subconscious beliefs, because it's never just about the ex, it's recycled pain. And people carry trauma with them. And sometimes the breakup, is a shakeup. Someone needs to redirect their life. So I'm actually really excited for people when they're going through a breakup, because I know what's, in store for them. Even though they're in like the middle of the tornado of pain, I know what happens past that pain point.
It's that breakthrough, the resolutions that will take place in order for them to integrate what happened, to move on from it. And it is an exciting thing to witness, definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So why did you start Renew Breakup Bootcamp?
Yeah, so I was, about 10 years ago, I was in a relationship, and I thought this was the one. Although I probably thought like 100 people have been my soulmate by now. I don't believe in soulmates, by the way. But this one I thought was different. We were, we had discussed our future, having a family, and I thought that this was going to be my happily forever after. And back then, to me, I was living the dream. I mean, I've been trying to date to get married since 15. That's kind of the mindset I had, and I never questioned it. And so I was on this track, and one day that relationship fell apart due to infidelity. And I put so much of my identity in him and us that I fell apart. I spiraled into depression. I had panic attacks. I had thoughts of suicide, and I was in a really, really dark place. And I tried everything I could to heal after I hit really like a tipping point of, I knew if I kept going the way I was going, I was going to spiral out of control. And I was like, okay, I have to fight to get out of this. And I tried therapy. I went to yoga retreats. I tried everything. And I really struggled, and it took quite a bit of time. I don't believe that time heals all wounds. I think doing the work heals the wounds, right? And in retrospect, I now realize that breakup was a Band-Aid that got ripped off, and I had to deal with all of my heartbreak, starting with the heartbreak with my father and this unavailable, chaotic relationship that we had that I just never dealt with. And so at the time of the breakup, I pointed the finger of blame at this person, my ex. I was like, it's all your fault, how unjust all of this is. But as I started to heal, I realized, wait a minute, I'm now healing so much more. And when I was able to get through to the other side, I've been a relationship columnist for about 12 years. I have my own blog. I've been writing for publications. And the people who would write into me were people who were feeling helpless and hopeless. And I knew what a scary place that is. And I was really lucky. I had friends that would come over and bring food and watch me eat. I had friends who let me stay in their homes when I didn't have a home because of the breakup. Yeah. And I thought, what happens to these people who don't have that support? And everyone is just a few bad decisions away from doing something completely destructive, which is why I was like, okay, I need to come up with the world's first breakup bootcamp to help people in this focused way to deal with the pain of heartbreak. We have hospitals that deal with, illnesses and when you break your leg, but why don't we have something when you break your heart?
Yes. I love what you said about time doesn't heal all wounds. I was having a conversation with Wim Hof a couple of lives ago, and someone was asking about time, and I was thinking, time doesn't heal all wounds. Time buries all wounds. And the thing is, if you don't do the work, if you don't allow these emotions to surface to the top, it's not going to pop. It's not going to be released. We're not going to be free from these shackles if we just keep burying them, placing them under the rug. They need to be explored. They need to be faced, confronted in order to be released. The more we detach from them, the more they remain trapped within us. And it's really about connecting to them to let them go. But we keep avoiding them, but we keep them trapped within us because of that. Yeah. There is a quote that you mentioned, and I just love that. At the beginning, you were saying, I may not be able to change the events of my history, but I can choose to change the story I attach to those events. And I thought that was brilliant. I love what you used I would love the idea of can and choose, because a lot of people, can is language of possibility, and we give ourselves that through that language. Choose as well, saying I can choose. We forget that we have choice. We forget that nothing has to be a have to. We can actually choose to do whatever we want to do. And what keeps us trapped is permanence, the belief that things are permanent, and that's what gives us hopelessness. But if we believe in the fact that everything changes, and I've been posting a lot about change and impermanence, and things are temporary lately, so it's amazing that we're having this conversation about this. But it's really about changing your relationship to the situation. And that's the thing. A lot of people think that's the only way to deal with the relationship. The situation, whatever the situation is. It doesn't have to be the relationship. And this is something for everyone watching right now. This is not just about intimate relationships. This can be applied for relationships in general, because identifying and we're going to get to, I'm not even going to mention the names of things we're going to talk about, but there's a lot more about communication in this book that is fantastic. There's a lot more about conflict resolution, which we may or may not have time. I've given up on the idea of having enough time to cover everything with every guest. So I'm like, you know what? We're either going to do a second one if the guest is up for it. But in general, we're just going to see how far we can go. But I just thought that was a beautiful, beautiful quote. Extremely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So why do people choose partners that are bad for them?
Yeah, so there's a few things. The first thing is something labeled attractions of deprivation. And this is when we choose people who can wound us in a very familiar way as to how we were wounded as children. And our psyche actually tries to recreate the scenario of the crime in order to change its ending. So I'll use myself as an example. I grew up with a very chaotic household. I'm the daughter of immigrant parents who came from China. My parents were never really around, and my father was very unavailable. And the only time I got some attention was when I got good grades. I would get, money. And so I never knew that this would be the beginning of a pattern for me. But as I grew up, I would choose people who, were super busy, generally very charismatic. In my 20s, it was DJs and club promoters. And I'm like, just trying to be like a groupie, trying to get their attention. And then in my early 30s, I changed that and started dating like tech entrepreneurs who were, always so busy trying to like make the next app. And I'm like 5th, 10th on the priority list. And editing myself, hoping that if I was just perfect, that I would be able to earn their love. And I was like, oh yeah, there's no pattern here, but people look so different. But then as I started to really explore my patterns, I realized that the emotional experience was exactly the same. It was me pining for more time, pining for more attention, hoping to earn love. And that experience, whether it was with a DJ or a tech CEO, was exactly the same as the experience I had with my father. So again, human beings, we are drawn to what is familiar. So we create this homeostasis. This is the baseline. And that's actually what you become comfortable with. So if you grew up with a lot of chaos, if you grew up with a lot of drama, that's actually going to become your baseline growing up. And you're going to feel like you have chemistry with people who can wound you in a very similar way. I use this term in the book. I call it the chemistry compass, which is our internal GPS, which kind of points us into the direction of who we're drawn to and who we're repulsed by. And again, if you didn't have a healthy model of what love looked like and felt like growing up, your chemistry compass is going to be pointing you into the direction. You're going to have that 10 out of 10, oh my gosh, that's crazy attraction with people who can subconsciously wound you in the very same way. And so I think really, we're not broken, but our chemistry compass might need some fixing.
Interesting. So I'm tempted to... I just wrote, probably 3 hours prior to this, I've been writing a couple of quotes that just blew me away. Mm. And I'm tempted to get into the attachment, but let's pause for a second there. Okay.
Do you want me to talk about intermittent reinforcement? It's actually not in the book. It's really interesting.
Ooh, go for it.
So for anyone listening who's in like a hot and cold relationship, or maybe you're settling for breadcrumbs, meaning you get spurts of attention here and there. Another reason why we choose people who are unhealthy for us is because of something called intermittent reinforcement. And if you've ever been to a casino and you've played the slot machines, you actually know what I'm talking about. Basically, when we don't know when the reward is going to come, it actually makes us hooked. So they've done studies on rats. And in the study, they took a group of rats and they put them in a cage. And they had a lever. And every time the rat pressed the lever, they would get a pellet of food. And so, nothing interesting there. You do A, you get B. And then the scientists were like, okay, let's try to see what happens when the rat presses the lever, and sometimes we release the food and sometimes we don't. And what they noticed was the rats got completely obsessed with pressing the lever. And they also noticed that the dopamine hit that they would get would be a lot more when they didn't have a consistency of when they were going to get the reward. So the same thing happens when you're, at the slot machine. You don't know when the reward's going to come. It might come now, it might not come later. Same thing happens with that rat. Same thing happens when you're into someone. They text you one day, they disappear for a week, then they come back and they love bomb you with flowers and compliments, and then they go away again. And so that whole push and pull thing is actually what's causing you to get hooked. And so I think it's really important we understand the psychology of what's going on, because sometimes we can think that, oh, no, this person, they're just my soulmate. They're the one. That's why I feel these strong things. Not really, right? So I think that if anyone is in that, it's really important for you to recognize, is this kind of hot and cold thing? Is it a blip? Is it kind of a one-off sort of a thing? Or is it a chronic pattern? And if it's a pattern, you need to interrupt the cycle or get out of it completely.
That's amazing. I mean, the anticipation is a really interesting thing to cover, because one of the things I remember they found, and if this is a different study, that it is the anticipation of the reward that gives you that dopamine shot, not the reward itself. And that's why it's so addictive. And that's the thing when it comes to that. So people get addicted to the anticipation of the hope of the person coming back. But yeah, we're going to get to that. I have to mention this quote, Amy. I have to. You were basically describing, I think, the first day at Renew Breakup Bootcamp. And you were basically saying, I'm here to give you permission to mourn, to grieve, to feel all the feels, and assure you that you don't have to adhere to a timeline to get over it. And the reason why I love that is two things. The word permission and time. Permission is really, if I think of what people seek out all the time, if you go to Tony Robbins' seminar, for example, or any other seminar, people are seeking permission to be themselves in that moment, to release their pain, to completely speak out the truth about how they feel. We're waiting for someone to give us permission instead of giving it to ourselves. And it's really interesting. And you're giving them permission. But I love the process from start to finish as you actually guide them through the whole thing. So that's point number one. Point number two, the time. Now, the idea is to adhere to a timeline. Don't have to adhere to a timeline. And the beauty of that is that the moment you add time constraints, you interrupt the integration of any processing of any emotion anyway. You block the release of any emotion, and it just impedes the progress and momentum. The moment you add time constraints, you add tension, and tension interrupts the whole process. But when we take our time to do anything, especially processing our emotions, expressing the truth about how we feel, why would we want to rush that? Why would we want to rush something like that? A lot of people are fast forwarding their life in every possible way, with smartphones, with social media. But with something like this, we never take the time to reflect, journal. I'm touching upon a lot of different things here, as you know, but we haven't really touched upon anything yet. So let's get into it. Let's talk about what is attachment theory.
Yeah.
Let's dive right in.
So basically, by the age of around 2 years old, we develop an attachment system which will pretty much determine how we relate romantically as adults. And there's three main types. So there's secure, avoidant, and anxious. And I'll go through each one. So about 50% of the population is in the secure category, meaning they're not afraid of intimacy. They're also not codependent. When there is a problem that arises in the relationship, they don't turn it into a big catastrophe. They're also able to communicate their needs and boundaries in a healthy way. Now, the next group is an avoidant attachment style. And avoidantly attached people subconsciously suppress their attachment system. It doesn't mean that they can't be in relationships, but there's always an emotional distance that they keep from people. And this generally comes from either parents that enmesh the child. So maybe there was a death, maybe the father died, and suddenly little Johnny, instead of being able to be like a little kid, has to step up to be the father figure and then take care of the younger siblings. Or maybe there was alcoholism, and suddenly little Johnny has to become the therapist to the mother, and the mother's talking about all this bad stuff about the father. It can also come from really over-controlling parents or parents that lived vicariously through the child's achievements. And so what happens is this child develops this nervous system that really equates intimacy with, oh my gosh, I'm going to get smothered. Like there's all this pressure and it's painful. And there's actually two types of avoidant, and I'm not going to go too much into it because it's a little confusing, but there's two types. There's a fearful avoidant, which is this comes from being disappointed from that primary caregiver, where they grow up and they're like, I'm going to be disappointed and hurt in love anyway, so I'm just going to stay away from it. And then there's dismissive avoidant, which was, I was so suffocated that intimacy is just going to make me feel so awful. I don't really want it. I'm totally okay being single. And so here's the interesting thing. Whether you're a fearful avoidant or a dismissive avoidant, you are drawn to the next category, which is an anxious attachment style. Anxiously attached people, they fundamentally fear that they will be abandoned or rejected. They are hyper vigilant to any signs and cues that the connection might be lost. So subconsciously, they'll be able to detect an inflection of the voice, a little eyebrow raise. And when they recognize, whether on a subconscious or conscious level, that the connection with the person that they're bonded to is in jeopardy, their nervous system has alarm bells, and they actually feel as if they're about to die. Like there's this kind of survival threat to them. They will then go and do what's called protest behavior. And these are attempts to either reestablish connection that, okay, everything's fine, or to get attention. This might include calling like crazy, or, deciding to punish the person. I know, for me, back in the day, I have a former anxiously attached style, and I'm now called an earn secure. I would, in my 20s, call like crazy, show up at the club, like, oh, you're working here? It's like your regular Friday night. And then until I realized, I'm like, okay, this could be stalker vibes. And then I went the other way. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to punish them. So if someone took me, 4 hours to call me back, I'd be like, screw you. I'll take 4 days, see how you like it. So there's this punishment. There's also this thing that, if they like someone too much, they get so anxious and on edge that they'll date 2 to 3 other people just to take the edge off. And so, yeah, and it's really interesting. Do you want me to go into the study that shows from childhood?
I mean, I think, to be fair, if we're going to talk about attachment style, let's talk about attachment style. Let's really cover it. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's really powerful and useful for people.
So what's really interesting is they've done this study called the Strange Situation Test, and they've repeated the study all over the world many times. And what they found was, so the study was, they would bring, a little baby toddler with their mother into a room, and there's all these toys in the room, and behind mirrors there's these researchers there, and they will see, how does a child react when the mother leaves the room. So with a secure child, basically, the mother comes into the room with them. They're able to explore, they look back to the mother. Okay, I'm safe. And they continue exploring, right? The mother leaves the room. They're a little distraught, but the mother comes back. They realize they're safe. And then they continue going on. This is exact same thing of how a secure grows up. They know that they have their primary attachment, which is a romantic partner. They feel safe to kind of explore into the world. Now, avoidantly attached, the mother and the child come into the room. The child acts aloof, plays with the toys. The mother leaves the room. Child looks like they don't even notice. Mother comes back into the room. Child looks like they don't even notice. But when they actually measured the heart rate and they realized that this child actually was having a physical stress response when the mother left the room, even though on the outside it appeared like nothing was affecting them. See, this is very important for us to understand, because for anyone who's ever dated someone with an avoidant attachment style, it's very easy to conclude like, oh my gosh, this person has no feelings. But they subconsciously suppress it. So they're having an internal stress response, but they might not even know it. Now, the anxiously attached, the mother and the child come into the room. Before the mother even leaves the room, the child begins to show a stress response. They're already anticipating that the mother is going to leave before the mother even goes. The mother leaves the room, the child goes hysterical. Then the mother comes back and tries to soothe the child. And even though the child is gripping on to the mother, wanting to be soothed, it's also angry and distraught. So it might be hitting the mother, throwing things at the mother, and takes the longest to calm down. And so, and then they follow these children into adulthood, and they realize that most of the time, the attachment style stays the same, but they've noticed that 20% have actually changed their attachment system. Now, what's important for us to understand is that your attachment style is on a spectrum. And so what that means is, as an adult, you could be, secure, but with more anxious tendencies. And so say, it's pre-pandemic, you're living your best life, you have a great job, you have wonderful friends, and so your anxious attachment doesn't really flare up. Then pandemic hits, you're on lockdown, you get to see no friends, then suddenly the person you're dating moves across the country, and you're feeling, oh my gosh, your anxious attachment style is just, skyrocketing. So and it also depends on who you're dating. If you're highly on the spectrum of anxious attachment style, and you're drawn to someone who's like severely on the avoidance scale, and that's when you're going to feel that crazy chemistry because there's so much tension. Your anxious attachment style is going to go even more. And if you have an avoidant attachment style, it's going to go even more.
So actually, let's pause there. In terms of why are they, even though they seem opposites, why are they so drawn to each other?
Yeah, so they both reconfirm each other's worldview, right? I know you've discussed this before in other conversations you've had. Our beliefs, are mostly subconscious, will dictate what we see in the world, right? There's the cognitive distortions of confirmation bias, where we will recreate scenarios to kind of prove that our beliefs are true. And so for the avoidantly attached who think, oh my gosh, love is going to suffocate me, they are going to draw in situations that confirm that reality for them. They also don't have the emotional glue to be able to go with another avoidant, because both are like, I don't care. And then it just doesn't continue. For an anxious, it's usually there's like a blow up, or there's like, one actually gets like, you're too needy. And so the anxious almost needs the avoidant to confirm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose the love. I'm going to get rejected. So they choose people who are unavailable, who kind of reconfirm this reality for them.
So they're constantly proving to themselves that they're right to believe what they're believing right now, in a way. And it's just constant.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And back to that whole, our discussion earlier about our homeostasis, right? We grow up and we have this comfort. And even if that comfort is chaos, even if that comfort is always trying to, be in anxiety because you're always reaching for someone, that's your comfort level. And then what happens is when, a secure person comes along, and you have an anxious attachment style, and you're used to this push-pull dynamic of intensity and anticipation. You're like, that nice person, so boring. Ugh, I have no chemistry with them.
So what I'm thinking right now is, since we're talking about attachment style, and it's one of three, right? Can parents pass on to their children their attachment styles?
Yeah, so there's different arguments for this. So some say that while you're in the womb, you're developing your nervous system and it can be passed on. Some say it's completely from socialization and those first 2 years of life. And I think it's also important to know, it doesn't mean that you had terrible parents that were, and you had huge trauma in your life. It could mean that they just weren't able to read the cues of their child. And so, maybe they let you cry it out. and you internally had this emotional memory of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be abandoned all the time. We now know that the part of the brain that stores actual memories, the hippocampus, develops later than the amygdala. And so there's research that shows that we actually have these emotional memories, but we actually don't remember the scene of the crime. Well, why do I have this anxiety and this abandonment that I carry with me? I don't understand where it came from. But it's possible that you don't remember what happened. So yeah, I think that you could argue that it could be passed down. I know, for me, my mom had a lot of anxiety. She was also trying to like win the love and attention from my father and did everything to kind of keep the marriage intact. And so, did I get it from her? Maybe. But I also know that, I would be left crying in the crib for hours and hours while they would all leave the house. They didn't know back then, right? That wasn't how you parent a child.
So, yeah. Okay. So again, I'm thinking about the idea of avoidance. You were just touching upon nature, but let's touch upon nurture for the same question. If I'm avoidant as a parent, automatically I'm going to create neglect because I'm avoidant, I would imagine. In a way, you may actually there's a way to create the same. You may create an avoidant child, but you could also help create an anxiously attached child because you're so avoidant. You're assuming that everything's fine, but the child feels neglected enough to develop an anxiously attached style. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that if you are a parent and you have an avoidant attachment style, it's with your primary attachment. So as children, our primary attachment is our parents. Then as we grow up, that primary attachment transfers onto our romantic partner. And so does it happen because we need them for our survival, right? As a baby, you need that person for survival, and then it kind of transfers on to your romantic partner. Now, the other way around, as a parent, you don't really need the child for survival. So if you're an avoidant, it might not necessarily mean that you treat your child with an emotional distance. It's with your romantic partner. Yeah.
Of course. As an anxiously attached style, the person tends to be anxious in general, I would imagine. There's a generalized kind of or is it just specific to romantic partner? And I'm talking about parents.
Yeah, I think it depends. There's definitely arguments that your anxious attachment style is going to show up in your friendships and whatnot. I know just anecdotally speaking, for myself and some of the people I've worked with at Renew Breakup Bootcamp, 90% of the people who come to Breakup Bootcamp, by the way, have anxious attachment style. They also take breakups the hardest because they put so much of their self-worth in the validation from their partner. So I never had issues with anxiety with my friends. It was only with romantic partners. So I think, it's very personal. And I also think with, these labels, such as attachment style, they're really starting points. I think sometimes people get a bit too obsessed with, well, I'm this. And then they're like, well, this is why I act the way that I do. But, it's quite complex and it's multi-layered, right? You might have had parents that were, extremely attentive and they did, all the right things to meet your needs as a child. And maybe one of your earliest experiences was pretty traumatic. That could also shift your trajectory.
So, okay, for people watching that are now thinking, okay, which style am I? But based on what you're explaining, they may come up with, okay, I'm probably anxious or I'm anxiously attached or I'm avoidant. Is this a life sentence? Can we change our style?
Yes, you totally can. Thank you to neuroplasticity.
Yes.
You can definitely change it, and it becomes what's called an earned secure. So that's really the goal. The goal isn't to become more like your partner, right? If you're anxiously attached, the goal isn't to become more avoidant. And it's not to be like, oh, okay, I'm going to manipulate how long it takes for me to text back so it looks like I'm all cool, which I totally tried to do. It doesn't work. The goal is for yourself to become more secure. And so, I was able to shift mine. I work with people who are able to shift theirs, but it takes, a lot of work. There's only part of it is on a cognitive level. So there's only so much talk therapy that you can do. And then I believe you have to look at what are other healing modalities that work for you to kind of hit the subconscious. For me, I recognize that my anxious attachment style was sabotaging my relationships. I kind of developed these coping mechanisms to reject people before they could reject me. The minute I saw any cue that they could be teetering, and I would make up these stories, even if someone wasn't losing interest, I'd be like, nope, you're not into me enough. I'm an independent woman. Like, I don't want you. And I would do these things and sabotage relationship after relationship, or I would have these huge blowouts because someone didn't initiate making plans with me. And so I finally recognized, I'm like, okay, the common denominator is me and my patterns. And I need to do something about this. And I'm like, I'm going to focus everything on really shifting this. So I tried so much, right? I tried the therapy. I tried all these things. What really worked for me, and this is personal, hypnotism worked. I also did a guided plant medicine ceremony. That also helped me a lot. I did breath work. So I did a combination of things that really helped me on a subconscious level. And then I started to also adjust my chemistry compass, which we'll probably get into later. But as I started to become more familiar with what healthy love felt like, I created a new homeostasis. I created a new baseline. And then eventually, the people that kind of breadcrumbed me, that liked me a little but not enough, that treated me in ways that weren't up to my standard, instead of that being a turn on, instead of unavailability being a turn on, it became a turn off. And I was like, this is gross. No, I don't want to be treated like that. Bye. And so naturally, as I became more secure and naturally as I became more emotionally healthy, I was just drawn to healthier people.
All right, I got to touch upon this. There's an overarching theme. People feel safety is at the heart of what we need, and then we have other needs. But safety, we need to feel safe. If I don't feel safe, I can't connect. If I don't feel safe, I can't learn. If I don't feel safe, I can't enjoy. If I don't feel safe, I cannot execute or perform any task because I feel threatened. So safety is at the heart. Now, when safety is not given to a child, a sense of scarcity emerges. Potentially. And if somebody feels that sense of scarcity, they feel that they're not enough. Right. That's their justification for why they have been abandoned. So then you have that. So the self-love that you're mentioning, the self-love that you're talking about really is about creating that sense of, if we can learn to accept ourselves, we can feel safe. But we are resisting. If we can release the emotional wounds and heal the emotional wounds, release the emotions and heal the emotional impact of the things that happened, we can start to feel safe. We can start to reintegrate. Those emotions need to be integrated in order for us to move on. The other aspect is abundance. That's another kind of big umbrella. To combat scarcity, we need to focus on abundance. And abundance is about trying to find ways to feel enough, to feel valuable, to feel accepted, but without seeking acceptance, without seeking approval. That's what makes it really tricky. You want to feel that acceptance, but you don't want to seek it, because the moment you seek it, it's a need. The moment you're attached to it, it's done. It's a need, there's a fear. Need and fear are two sides of the same coin. The moment you have a need, there's a fear of not having it or the fear of losing what you get. And therefore, now it's more out of desperation than desire. And this blows this whole thing out of, so I just wanted to point out safety, scarcity. What we're after is feeling safe and feeling abundant. If we were to really simplify it, because abundance gives us a sense of safety. And you touch upon different ways of creating abundance. This is like an overarching thing, but I just wanted to kind of create this macro umbrella to kind of simplify it. Safety, abundance, because of threat and scarcity. You talk about gratitude, which we're going to pause for a sec. I know people, hey, let's talk about gratitude. What? Pause. We're gonna do that. We're going to talk about this. There's so much we're going to talk about, as much time as we can. I mean, obviously, we did talk about the time, and I'm like, if we hit a certain amount, if we hit a certain time, we probably would need to end it and wrap it up just in case, because I don't want to lose this, because I think a lot of people will benefit from this in so many ways. So let's get back to attachment style one last time, just to close that properly. So, I'm anxiously attached. What do I do? Because I know there are certain things unique to focus on for each. What would I do?
Yeah, great question. And I loved your macro summary, right? Because whether you're anxious or avoidant, it's two sides of the same coin. It comes from the root fear that intimacy is not safe, right? So the avoidant thinks intimacy is going to, take away my freedom and my sense of self. And the anxious thinks that intimacy is going to reject me and abandon me, but it comes from the same fear. And so if you have an anxious attachment style, how can you become more secure? The one thing that you could do right now, and especially right now you're in a pandemic, it might be hard to go meet people, is you want to actually look at who's in your current tribe and your village, because who you're surrounded with, who you have the most exposure to, that's actually wiring your brain. It's influencing your brain. And so if you are, you have a roommate who's super judgmental, who's completely flaky, and you feel really insecure in that relationship, but you're exposed to them all the time, well, guess what? That is actually wiring your neural pathways of connection and trust. And it's actually not creating those necessary neural connections that you need. So you want to, I do this exercise in the book, is take a step back and reflect on who are you exposed to the most. And this doesn't mean like the people that you like the most. It's like, who are you around the most that's actually molding your brain? And you want to categorize them. Are they high safety, medium safety, low safety? Low safety is like those ones that you just do not feel safe with. And, if you don't have many in the high safety, you want to then, okay, I want to increase my exposure to high safety. So you either make more an effort with that best friend that makes you feel really good, and like you have these trusting conversations and you feel safe and seen with, and start to decrease your exposure to the low safety. And this is going to take some time. You're not going to be able to do it right away. And it also means that the ones that you have medium, are medium safety relationships, you might want to start renegotiating those dynamics. And having those conversations of boundaries. And eventually what you're going to do is you're going to create a tribe of people that are more high safety, and that is going to help you have the necessary neural pathways of trust and healthy connection, which is first and foremost what you need, because that's going to have a ripple effect in your relationships with romantic partners. Now, the second thing is to start to learn how to interrupt the cycle when you feel that anxiety, because we all have like a few kind of key triggers. So I would say right now, you can write in your journal, what are your 2 to 3 triggers, right? For me, it was when someone didn't have consistent communication, if they didn't initiate making plans with me. It was like clockwork how I would react. So you write down what are your triggers, then you write down what's your typical reaction. For me, I would fly off the handle and then I would go hedge and date someone else. And then you want to be like, okay, well, what's the story that happens when you have this trigger? And mine was like, they're not interested in me. This always happens to me and all that. So you can actually see the thinking traps in the stories that you're creating around the emotion. Next, you want to write down and you strategize what's a healthier response. And what would this healthier response, how could that look like in terms of the shift in the result? And when you write that, you brainstorm different ideas like, okay, I know the next time I feel panic, I'm actually going to do a state change. I'm going to put in a timer for 2 minutes and just shake my body from head to toe. What that does is it helps release adrenaline and cortisol that's pulsing through your body and moves it out. Then I'm going to do some deep breaths and then I'm going to meditate before I do anything, right? You figure out different strategies. And then you visualize it, because visualizing helps you create those first, the grooves of the neural pathways, so that by the time it's game time, it's not the very first time. And you practice this the next time you get triggered. And what happens is the first few times you're like, oh, it doesn't work. Like I'm still reacting the same way. But if you now, again, you have the awareness, it does give you that ability to be like, I can choose now. And I remember when I started doing this, my reaction, my healthier response was to do a state change. I would do jumping jacks, and then I would do some deep breaths, and would do a visualization of safety. And the first few times I still fly off the handle, and then I would do it a bit more, and then suddenly I was like, oh, I'm flying off the handle a lot less. And then eventually I was able to actually completely interrupt the cycle and stop reacting and yelling and, having this big blowout with someone. And so again, it takes some time to kind of create those new neural pathways, but you can start now.
So what about, here's the thing, when I was reading, I was thinking about the avoidant versus the Because emotions in general, like the heart, everything I've researched and studied, emotions is at the heart of everything. And emotions, the fear gives birth to all negative emotions, from sadness to guilt to anger. But what's interesting is the deepest form of fear is loss. We fear rejection because we fear the loss of acceptance. We fear change because we fear the loss of certainty. We fear the unknown because we fear the loss of control. We fear death because we fear the loss of life. There is a link to loss. And so when you look at the avoidant with the anxiously attached, the anxiously attached fears rejection. They fear the loss of acceptance. But the avoidant fears the loss of connection, the loss of freedom as well. And here's what's interesting. Everybody needs connection. Everybody wants connection. But imagine if you fear what you need. And it's a very difficult situation. They fear connection, but they need connection at the same time. That creates a very difficult and challenging conflict inside. I feel like because of that suppression, avoidance may be suffering a bit more than an anxiously attached, because at least the anxiously attached is expressing in some way. And when we suppress in that way, it's just a lot harder for our nervous system. So to tie that in, last point, avoidant, the avoidance. If I'm avoidant, what do I do to manage my avoidance?
Yeah, so something that avoidants do is they will chase people with an impossible future. They might, put their ex on a pedestal, or they'll date someone and for the first 3 months it's great, and then they start noticing all the imperfections. They're like, oh, no, you're just not the one. So there's always a sense of a unicorn. I think first it's to recognize if you're doing that, because that is a way of avoiding intimacy. And so it's harder. You need a lot of kind of self-awareness, because it's easy to be like, oh, no, it's everyone's fault. That's why, right? I mean, even at Breakup Bootcamp, only 10% of the people who come have an avoidant, because they realize like, okay, I have a pattern here. I want to work on it. So I think recognizing that. And the next thing is being able to communicate the boundary, right? I think what avoidants deal with a lot is guilt. And so when they feel guilt, the overwhelming discomfort of the emotion is like, I'm just going to avoid it. And they might not be able to even place a label on what they're feeling. They just like, oh my gosh, there's so much pressure. I don't want it. And then they're out. And so when you communicate your boundaries and you're safe to, because think about this child who's avoidant. If they had a smothering parent, if they had to become the head of the household at age 3 or age 4, age 5, they don't have the safety of being able to have these emotions. And so, they grow up with the same kind of reaction, right? The same reaction repeated through years and decades becomes their programming until they decide, like, I need to reprogram this. And so, when you know that you're safe to have those conversations with someone, and that's why it also helps. So if you date someone insecure, they're able to actually, when you pull away, instead of taking it as this personal blow as an anxiously attached would, be like, oh, I understand they're needing some space right now. Let's talk it out. My partner, he is secure, but more has avoidant tendencies. I'm secure with anxious tendencies. And in the beginning, he never was able to communicate that he needed some space. And we would have these blowouts. And finally, I started discussing with him. And then he felt safe to communicate like, hey, I just need some time sometimes to just like unplug, listen to podcasts, and not feel like I need to like hang out all the time. I'm like, oh my gosh, totally okay. Like, let's do this. Like, let's have a day where like, it's totally independent. You do your thing, I do my thing. Let's try with that. And I created a safe environment for him. And then so slowly that trained him created his healthy neural pathways for connection that, oh, I'm not going to get rejected or shunned or shamed or yelled at if I express my need for autonomy. So it starts small. And I would probably, if you're not used to kind of expressing your boundaries because you're afraid of the wrath, start small, and then build up your kind of muscle for being able to have those conversations.
This is such a fascinating conversation, because this is something that a lot of people need, especially right now during the pandemic. A lot of people are going through breakups. The pandemic has, in my opinion, allowed unhealed wounds in people around the world to resurface. And that revealed, and now they're adapting to this new fear that allowed all the other wounds to surface, and everybody's communicating in a very different way. And I'm sure a lot of couples are seeing a side that they haven't seen before. And it's really nothing more than an adaptation to what's happening right now. So before I jump into that, because I really would want to talk about the breakup and what people, and that topic. But before I do, there's one more thing about the avoidant. The avoidant, I was reading on different ways, and one thing you were mentioning is labeling, writing down how you feel. It really made me smile, because this is something, again, emotions are really important to me, and I've researched a lot about emotions and how to express emotions. And I love that study that was mentioned. It's Dr. Matthew D. Lieberman, if I'm not mistaken, at UCLA, where he found that when you label an emotion, let's say anger, as you mentioned in the book, anger, so that's if somebody expresses it, what ends up happening is that lowers the activity. It no longer triggers the amygdala. The amygdala is no longer as triggered. And then the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for emotional processing and inhibiting behaviors, is activated. And that's just from expressing. And that's something that I read that you mentioned for avoidance. The reason why I'm mentioning this is I believe this is really important for anyone. Because in truth, I mean, the avoidant suppresses emotions. So they need this more. And I just touched upon that, right? But the anxious expresses emotions in an unhealthy way. And this is a healthy way to do it. So in a way, it feels like both styles, but even the secure, to kind of maintain the security whenever you feel something, expressing how you feel. But here's my question about the study. And I don't know if you know the answer to this. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just sharing this with you. Was it written or was it spoken in the study?
In this study, it was written. So, and there's quite a few studies that show that labeling the emotion helps minimize the stress response. I talk about it with avoidance because avoidants generally have a tendency to not know what they're feeling and maybe even disassociate from the feeling. So labeling the emotion can help. In cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, the extra trick is to, instead of saying, I am sad, you actually add some buffers in between there, because you are actually not the emotion. You are someone feeling an emotion, and that emotion will actually, reach its chemical peak and it'll pass. So you would say, I am feeling the emotion of sadness. And that again takes away that sting a little bit more and a little bit more, right? It's totally okay for us to feel our emotions. That's really healthy for us. It's another thing when we feed the emotion, right? I talk about the emotional monster, and I imagine the Pac-Man, right? And I know for me, when I went through my breakup, I just kept listening to Coldplay, Fix You, on repeat. And then I would watch Love Actually, and I'd be like, oh my God, this will never happen to me. And I was just feeding my emotional monster, right? Some people call it emotional cutting. You're just like, just give me more. And so I think it's important for us to recognize when we're feeling it and the difference between when we're feeding it. And are those emotions, sadness, anger, rage, all that, they want the thoughts, right? Those cognitive distortions, the catastrophizing, this always happens to me, I'll never find love. They want those thoughts. They want your body language that's hunched over in fetal position. It wants the sad songs. It wants the conversations of, re-traumatizing yourself and victimizing yourself, for that emotion to get bigger and bigger and to stay around longer and longer.
Feeding versus feeling the emotion. That's really powerful, because in terms of the language, I love what you said, because what you said is, I am feeling the emotion of sadness. Now, what's interesting verbally and psychologically for everybody watching, just by distancing you, which is I, from the word sadness, I am sadness, there's just one word separating the I from sadness. But when you say, I am feeling the emotion of sadness, look at how many words that are distancing you from it. And just by doing that psychologically, it really allows you to detach. Here's something, I don't know if I mentioned this about Japan. So I spent about 19 days there, and I was fascinated by the language. And one of the things related to Japan is they don't express their negative emotions in the first person. So they don't say, I am angry. They say anger is felt. And I thought that was really interesting to detach as an observer, just witnessing something happening rather than being. Because when you say, I am angry, you're automatically defining yourself with the emotion. So what ends up happening is, how can you get rid of yourself? So now you made it harder psychologically to get rid of the emotion you want to get rid of and release, because I am the emotion. Now it's a part of your body. I just mentioned a quote, video. I posted a video about the finger and the opinion. People look at opinions as a finger. They fight for to the death to protect, when it could just be a ring that you can replace. But the way we look at things can trap us, and this is an example of that, definitely. So that's pretty cool. The re-traumatization. There's something, I'm going to get back to the quotes because you've written a lot of great quotes. Give me a sec. So I'm not sure if I'm paraphrasing this. This is from memory. If you're still vilifying your ex, you're still in a relationship with your ex. And that is gold. That is gold. Can you elaborate on that? I have a couple things to share, but I just want to hear you first.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I work with people who, it might be a year or 2 or even 5 years after their breakup or their divorce. And they're still in this cycle of how unfair everything is and pathologizing them. What a narcissist. They did this to me. And, I say this all the time. If you're still blaming your ex, vilifying your ex, hoping for your ex to change, you're still in a relationship with your ex. And that emotional charge is keeping you hooked. And sometimes we hold on to the pain because that's the last part of the relationship we've got left. We don't know that that's keeping us attached. That's not allowing those old neural pathways to prune away. And so, in the very beginning of a breakup, yes, there's going to be a period of time where you're talking about the story over and over again. That's your brain's way of processing and dealing with the shock of what has just happened. But after a period of time, if you just keep repeating that story, and remember, your memories are not fact. You're changing. Every time you recall a memory, you're shifting and changing that memory. It's like a game of telephone. And so suddenly you start to add on interpretations to the facts. So for example, for me, I was in a breakup, there was infidelity, and then I kept repeating the story. And I was also trying to get people onto my side. And then get them, rallying against my ex. So suddenly the story wasn't about the breakup and the infidelity. Suddenly it was, he did this to me. I gave him the best years of my life. I did this, I did that. How dare he? And suddenly that story is changing, but I'm telling it over and over and over again. And I'm re-traumatizing myself. And, our body can't tell the difference between what's happened in the past, the present, and the future. That's why if I was to associate into the memory of when I was in the bathtub contemplating suicide, I would probably start crying. I would have a stress response right now, even though it happened 10 years ago. My body is experiencing it again. So I think something we need to ask ourselves, whether it's a story about a breakup or an ex or any story, is that story serving you now? And by telling it over and over again and getting people rallying them into, yeah. Are you trauma bonding? Are you bonding on pain? And is that helping you?
Absolutely. The visualization, something to just clarify about visualization as well to anyone watching. Our bodies react to what we see in our heads, as an example. So when we visualize something, our bodies react to it. The mind cannot tell the difference between something you vividly imagine and something you actually experience. And that's a powerful thing. That's why we react to phobias when we think about it. That's the difference between a phobia and a fear. If I'm afraid of spiders versus having a phobia, I just need the image. It's just, I'm there. So that's very powerful to generalize. If I get bitten by a dog, that, my mind's going to generalize to protect me. But it does serve a purpose if I want to learn how to open the door. Because I don't want to learn how to open a door every single time I'm facing a door. So it just generalizes to help me. But it's really important to clarify visualization is a powerful tool. So what you see, your body reacts to. So we can change what we see. We can see what happened and adjust it. And there are ways, neurolinguistic programming can do that. Although it doesn't take away the emotional impact, that's a different conversation. But it does help. And or you could just choose to see something else, like one of the exercises that you recommend. Visualize a happy memory with someone, and visualize them, and someone you love, and close your eyes, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a visualization that will automatically, your body's going to react to it. We have the power to choose what we see. And therefore we have the power to indirectly get our bodies to react to the way we want them to. We want the body to react. We have that power, but we forget it. And I'm just saying it and emphasizing it right now for people to remember that. The last thing I want to mention about the vilifying and the X, I was having a conversation with Chris Hadnagy, the top social engineer in the world, on his podcast, and I was mentioning that peers, actually that was with Dave Asprey, peers, we need to pay attention to the peers or the people we surround ourselves with, because the people we surround ourselves with, we are mirroring creatures, so we tend to mirror them. So what ends up happening is, if I'm spending time with people, I tend to mirror those. And if I'm imagining someone in my head because I resent them, like an ex, and I'm constantly thinking of them over and over and over, that's my peer. And I may actually tend to start mirroring the person I'm spending a lot of mental time with. And that's another aspect of it. Focus equals importance. The mind assumes what you're looking at right now is important. So what are you choosing to what are you choosing to see in your mind? Is what you're telling the mind is important to you. And we have the power to change that. So, okay, let's get to the pandemic. Let's get to that question. So people right now going through a breakup. We covered a bit of it, but just to kind of give them an overview. Someone going through a breakup right now during the pandemic. What are the do's? What are the don'ts?
Yeah.
Overview.
Yeah. I'll start with what not to do. We've already talked about not vilifying your ex. We talked about don't feeding your emotional monster. The next thing is do not stalk their social media. I know this is really tough because you're also, at home, so you're around your screens all the time. Do yourself the favor and set yourself up for success. Block them. Block their number so you're not wondering if they're going to contact you, and know what's happening when you're craving, checking their Instagram feed. Your body is craving that hit of dopamine. You need to think of your ex like they're your drug dealer right now. And, they've done studies on the brain of the newly separated, and they saw that the same part of the brain is activated as a drug user feeding for their next fix. You're physically in withdrawal. And so prepare yourself for the withdrawal. And when the withdrawal comes and you're like, oh my gosh, I just want to contact them, I want to yell at them, know that even if you call them and it's going to be a negative interaction, you're still getting a hit of endorphins. You're still getting a rush. And that again is keeping you hooked. And you're not allowing those neural pathways to prune away. So I would recommend a minimum of 60 days of completely no contact, no looking at, photos, going down memory lane. Allow those neural pathways to prune away. I would say channel your inner Marie Kondo. If you have reminders of them, put it in a box, either donate it or just have it out of sight. Again, those are anchors. So if you're seeing everything the same, it's going to, trigger you back into the memory lane. And that might even mean, like, they've actually done studies, like just even changing the interiors, moving around your furniture, that will actually help with this kind of welcoming the new and, not being so anchored to the past. I would also say at a certain point, right, there's different stages of separation. It starts at shock, then it goes into denial, then depression, then anger, then another sense of like denial. Maybe you'll relapse and get back together with your ex until you hit a point of acceptance. And healing isn't linear. You're going to jump back and forth. But if you resist the stage, meaning you judge yourself, you're shameful about what you're feeling, you're actually just going to get stuck in that stage even longer. And so there's different strategies depending on what stage you're in. I think once you kind of past the shock and denial stage, you want to, and you're kind of in the depression stage, throw yourself a breakup party. And what does that look like? Get your closest friends on Zoom, or there's actually, a company called Tribute.co. You can do a video montage. Everyone just goes and they take a turn saying, this is what I love about you the most. In those moments, when you're having a withdrawal, and it takes about 20 to 30 minutes for the intensity of that withdrawal to start to subside, generally. watch that video. That's going to give you some of those feel good chemicals. That's going to remind you when you're doubting your self-worth because of the breakup that you are awesome. Just because it didn't work out with this person doesn't take away your awesome. And I think it's also super important right now that you do those things that your body might not even want to. You eat healthy, you exercise. Exercise is proven to actually give you those chemicals, those hits of endorphins as well that help you feel good about yourself. And so you want to really make sure that you're doing these things, even if your body and your mind is being like, no, just stay in fetal position and listen to Coldplay and eat ice cream. You have to kind of override that desire to do so because it's not helping you.
So someone was just asking right now about what was the website, tribute.co? How do you spell it?
Tribute.co, TRIBUTE.co.
.co for whoever was asking about that. You also mentioned synaptic pruning, or maybe you didn't, but you were talking about pruning. So just for people in the audience at the moment, just listening to this, can you just touch upon what happens during the breakup in the brain? Just like a quick kind of overview about that. And what is synaptic pruning? Because you did touch upon it in what to do, but just to kind of clarify that.
Yeah. So when you're in a relationship with someone, you have neural pathways that wire together, right? Every time you have breakfast, every time you have sex, all that stuff. Those neural pathways are getting deeper and deeper and deeper. Think of it like a groove, and there's like water going down it, and that groove's just getting deeper and deeper. After a breakup, your body is in a state of shock. So even though you know that it's technically over, your body is like, what the hell? Give me that hit of dopamine, give me those feel-good chemicals. It doesn't understand what's going on. So it's going to motivate you. It's going to activate your motivation system to go get that fix. So that's why you're going to be like, oh my God, I need to check their social media, right? That's your brain wanting that hit of dopamine. But every time you do, and you scroll down memory lane, and then you reread those emails, and you're visualizing your vacation together and all that stuff, you're just actually strengthening those old neural pathways. What happens with synaptic pruning is eventually, if you stop doing that, you interrupt that thought pattern from ruminating, you go and you put your phone down, you go for a run, you do things that get you in flow state. Eventually what will happen is those old neural pathways will start to prune away. That's how, like, habit forming too, right? You create these new behaviors. In the beginning, you're like, this is so contrived, it doesn't feel natural. But the more you do it, you start deepening those grooves. And then the older neural pathway starts to prune away. I think it's important that we understand what's happening on, the body level, the brain level, because then it's not just like, yeah, don't talk to your ex. You actually understand, when I do, this is actually what's happening. Which that awareness, again, empowers you to make that choice the next time, you are about to check their social. And I think even just having a few checkpoint questions will kind of snap you out of this survival state and your monkey brain and, activate your prefrontal cortex. Ask yourself, is this going to serve me? Am I being kind to myself? And sometimes, to this day, I will use those two questions when I know I'm about to do something that's not healthy for me, but I really want to do it. I ask myself, and sometimes that's just enough for me to pause and be like, I'm going to choose different. And there you go. You're changing the direction degree by degree, because, for those who might feel overwhelmed by, feeling like the light at the end of the tunnel is so far out of reach, remember that we may not be able to change our destination in an instant, but we can choose to change the direction right now, degree by degree, step by step. Every single decision, they add up.
That's amazing. Synaptic pruning is really interesting to me because we can use it in the other way. We can use it in the opposite way. So think of all the beautiful connections you have with people in your life, family members that you haven't reached out to, people that you haven't thought about, habits, beautiful habits or hobbies that you used to enjoy that you stopped for a long time. Just thinking about that. You've created synaptic pruning to the things you love. And this is really about reactivating. You can reactivate these pathways in order to strengthen these connections. But at the same time, what Amy's talking about is basically, or what you're talking about, third person, first person, what you're talking about is basically starving these pathways in order for them to begin to fade. And that takes away the power that it has over you. We just need to prevent the access to certain memories long enough for these pathways to begin to fade. This is, just to be clear, this is about habits, biochemical habits, things that are happening in the brain, but we're not talking about wounds. So processing a wound is different. Breath work is different, because we just said time doesn't heal all wounds. There's a slight difference between the two things we're sharing. You can't synaptically prune an emotion away because the impact is still there and needs to be integrated. So there's a big difference between both, and I just wanted to clarify that. There's something that you were mentioning in the book about movement and the power of movement, and how that helps. And you were talking about the deer being chased by a cheetah and then shaking it off. And so one of the things would be to shake your body if you can, or at least work out or do anything to create that release. Are you familiar with TRE, trauma releasing exercise?
No. Tell me.
Sorry, I don't know, slow down. No.
Tell me.
Trauma releasing exercise, I believe, has been created by Dr. David Berceli, and it follows that. And if you haven't heard of it, this is really cool. What he did is he created 7 exercises that you do for 15 minutes. And after the 15 minutes, you lie on the ground for 15 minutes in a certain position, and your body, because of the activation that happened from the exercise, will begin to shake uncontrollably on its own. You can continue going beyond 15 minutes, but it would exhaust the body. So after 15 minutes, there's a move you can make, a change in the posture that will deactivate it. And the parts of the body that will start to shake vary depending on where trauma is stored, which is really interesting. So, and if you do it, what he says is if you do this every other day for 30 days, that's 15 sessions, you can release most, if not all, of the traumas in your life that have been stored. And that is really interesting, because I started thinking of, okay, so in order for us to express, we need to use muscle. Full stop. Muscle is what we need to express, to communicate with other people, but to release our emotions as well. Even by saying, I feel angry, I'm expressing it. And that's the power of telling the truth about how we feel. Because I think we got 3 challenges as humans in general. The inability or the difficulty in reinforcing our boundaries, saying no instead of saying yes when we actually mean no, and expressing the truth about how we feel. And so with that, I was thinking, okay, so using muscle, TRE, what else do we do? Because that is uncontrolled contractions and relaxations, repetitive, uncontrolled contractions. And the 3 things I can think of is laughing, crying, and orgasms. These 3 create that release in and of itself. The muscles are just kind of like TRE. So I highly recommend checking out TRE and David Berceli. Cool. That would be really interesting, actually. Yeah. So that's amazing. Yeah.
I do love, the shaking exercise. I do it. I mean, I just did it the other day. Like, it's not just for people going through a breakup. I think especially for people who are feeling anxiety, or, you might get an email that you're angry about. I just, had an email from a press person that I was really upset about. And right after, I could feel it all in my body. And I put on a timer for 2 minutes, and I shook from head to toe. And afterwards, I was like, all right, I feel a lot better. So it works.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Shaking works because it's exactly why the deer does it. And we get to do it. This is what David Berceli touched upon, is releasing trapped emotions from the past. But definitely shaking in general is something, it's really, really important to do. I'd like to touch upon the thinking traps. The thinking traps is an interesting one. I loved going through it. It's very quick, but I think for people to understand, can you just talk a bit about thinking traps, and we can go through them so that people can just take notes and think about it, because to think about what type of thinking trap or combination are you using in your life?
Yeah. So our brains are meaning making machines, and we have interpretations, and so that's why, one thing can happen to two different people and they'll have totally different responses to it, right? And our emotions, they've done studies that show that our primary emotion only lasts for 90 seconds. What happens, why that emotion sticks around longer for hours, days, years, are the stories we attach to that primary emotion. And so what happens is we all are privy to what's called cognitive distortions, aka thinking traps. And this actually just kind of adds to that emotion. So, I mentioned this in my story before. Blaming is one of the thinking traps. Catastrophizing. So, for example, you might have gone through a breakup and then you go like this, I'll never find love again. Mind reading is another one where you think you know what that person's thinking. There is all or nothing thinking when you say things like, this always happens to me. I'll never find love at this age. And being caught in shoulds. So I should have done that. They should have done that. That's another one. Very, very common for people who are going through a breakup. And there's an entire list of different thinking traps. It's in my book. You can also Google them. And I think a really helpful exercise, whatever you're going. Yeah. Do you want to share the other ones?
Sorry, no. I'll just. Yeah. I'll tell you what. I'm just going to go through them. You just flesh them out because I think they're really. Yeah, that would be a lot easier. Okay. Right. Filtering.
Right. Filtering is when you think that everyone rejects you. You have this belief, and then you see reality of like, oh, that person's eyebrow, that was rejection. Oh, they didn't text me back after an hour. Oh, they don't like me. So you filter everything to kind of confirm your belief of what is true.
Okay, overestimating.
This is when you think that, for example, the pain will never go away. So you're going through a breakup. You're like, oh my gosh, this pain is going to last forever. You're overestimating how bad this pain is going to be. Okay.
This is like a round. This is like a lightning round. Okay. Fortune telling.
Fortune telling is when you think that you could read the future. You might go, well, I'm 35. I'm never going to have kids from now. Who's going to want to marry me at, 39 with 4 kids? Like you predict the future, even though you have no crystal ball.
You already covered mind reading, should statements, and blaming. Personalizing.
This is when you turn something into something about yourself. Maybe you got ghosted. And then instead of being like, oh, this person is probably going through something, you go, oh my gosh, it's like, my hair wasn't that good that day. Maybe I said something stupid. No, I was just too desperate. Like you make it into a situation about yourself, even though you have actual no fact that it's about you.
Last one, because you touched upon all or nothing thinking, change fallacy.
Having this expectation that your happiness or your peace will happen if someone else changes. If only they do this, I will be okay. If only, they text me more, I will feel safe. You're expecting someone else to change, or you have these arbitrary rules and ideas of what needs to happen on the external world in order for you to feel X.
So change fallacy to me is it's such a powerful one, because what you're doing is you're giving someone else the power to control you, because you're creating a reality in your mind by saying, if only they do that, then I can achieve this. So now it's like you're locking yourself in a prison, in a cell, throwing the key through the bars and just waiting for them to set you free. You just created a prison that was based on your own design, and you're waiting for someone else. And a lot of people just lose control by giving someone else the power to control them. We forget that we're always in control. We forget that we have the power to control our reality. But the moment we hand it over to someone else, suddenly we believe that reality we created, and we remain trapped until someone gives us permission to realize that we have choice, until someone comes up with a Renew Breakup Bootcamp and opens up people's minds and realizing that. Now, here's the thing. Here's the thing that's really important for me to ask. So this book, just to be clear, the boot camp is for women initially. Are you thinking of opening a boot camp for men and women, or is it still going to be focused on women?
Yeah, so the book is written for women because I'm a woman and I share a lot of my own experiences. But really, I mean, I've had so many men read the book and reach out because it's not about man, woman, or your sexual orientation. It's about relationship patterns. Right now, my boot camps are only for women, but I am going to be opening up something for men. So whether it's co-ed or if it's only for men, I will be doing something. And I'm just finding a lot of men now reaching out and wanting the support. So yeah, it's going to be happening. I do workshops as well. Like I have a workshop tonight and it's for men and women, single, married, dating. Again, breakups are a great catalyst, but you know what everyone finds, whether they've read the book or they've come to Breakup Bootcamp, is, you know, it's not about a breakup. It's about relationship patterns.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So to me right now, I'm thinking, okay, I want to play it safe. I want to play it safe because we can, here are the things that we can talk about. And if you're open for us, and I'm not putting you on the spot, if you're open to another interview, another conversation, maybe in a month or two, I would be honored to have you because
for sure,
because
would love to. Yeah. I mean, it seems like there's the community has been so amazing. There's a lot of questions. So yeah, I would love to do a follow-up, even answer some questions for sure.
Yes. Yes. So we can touch upon a couple of there's so much we can cover from the book, but also answering questions that people are asking right now. So what I can do right now, I'm just going to let people know, if you have questions for Amy, please send me, just DM me, but just make sure that you type in Amy before you ask the question. And I know that it's going to be a question for Amy. And when the time comes, I'm going to save them. I'm going to go through them. And we're going to go through all the questions and we're going to answer them one by one. So make sure you do that when we're done. And Amy, it has been an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you. I had so much fun. There's so much ground that we've covered, and I can't wait to cover more. So thank you so much for being here. And if there's any last words for now, anything you want to share with the audience?
Yeah. Our greatest lesson in this lifetime is to practice opening our hearts, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. And I say this because we've all gone through pain, whether it's from the past or we're going through a breakup now. And there might be this tendency to close up and build walls around your heart. But when you know that you have tools that you can use to get back up and build your resilience, you know that you can love with an open heart and that your heart doesn't actually break. It might get bruised, but no one actually breaks your heart because the very foundation of the ground that you stand on isn't based on someone else. So know that you are more resilient than you think you are, and love with an open heart. And that is a practice.
Amy, thank you so much. Everyone, Breakup Bootcamp, buy it now. There are different places, but let's go for Amazon for now. But just Breakup Bootcamp, and I'm going to promote. I'm going to talk about
Amazon would be great.
Amazon would be fantastic. You heard her, people. Amy, have an incredible month. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to connecting with you soon. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you.